Welcome to session 10 of stage 1 in the Your Way recovery program. As we center today, I invite you to take a deep breath and become comfortable where you sit. Center yourself in this moment. Connect to being present, to just being where you are right now. Connect to the room and to this minute in time. Not thinking beyond the minute that's right in front of us. I invite you to vest yourself in this moment. Our only responsibility right now is to ourselves. We are here to expand. We aren't starting over or even creating a new life. Our process here is about evolving one step at a time from where we are right now to where we are going next, to moving into who we want to become. But evolution can only happen if we move from what we know and have been to what we don't know and have never been. If we knew where we were going, it wouldn't be evolution. It wouldn't be growth. What makes growth growth is moving into something new. But all we have to do today is take one step. We don't need to worry about that end that we seek. We don't need to worry about where we'll be tomorrow or next week or next year. Where are you today? Right here, right now, where are you? And if your life is less than what you want it to be, that's okay. It's just where you're beginning. But if we spend our time focused on where we want to go and don't recognize where we are, we'll often find ourselves in the same place years later. So where are you right now? And where are you going next? As we take steps that are about growth, life naturally becomes better. Today's question for contemplation is, what thing could you do today, even if it's a small thing? What could you accomplish today that would help you know tomorrow that you had really grown? If you really knew your life was moving in the direction you would like it to move, what step would you take to get there? For those of you that choose to just do the centering process today, you can pause the video here and do the session 10 centering practice. To do that, you can pause the video now. As you're ready to continue, we'll now go straight into that brain chemistry series and talk about the state of rest and digest. And then I'll follow that up with a take-home tool that really is about observation, about measuring, from a scale of 1 to 10 where you are in consciousness. And it's really cool. This measurement won't be about measuring how triggered you are or aren't. It's going to be about what state of consciousness am I in. So we'll go into the class now and then continue with that take-home tool immediately after. I hope you enjoy the information. The second state of consciousness we're going to talk about is the other primal state. So primates generally exist in two states: dying, not dying, right? So we're not in our not dying state. I call this a surviving state. I'm going to survive today, right? The tiger's not chasing me. My relationships are okay. I have my job. I have a home to live in. So all the things that make me feel safe are okay today, right? Even if they're not perfect, they're okay enough that I don't feel like a tiger's chasing me. I didn't do that. The brain chemical that's released is serotonin. So, in fact, I call serotonin the I'm not dying chemical. So it's released through the digestive system. We'll talk a little bit more about body systems, but serotonin is what's released, and we enter what's called a rest and digest state, right? So this is when basically we're not being chased by that tiger. We're okay. We've reached primal homeostasis, and we feel safe and well. Now we're going to go into rest and digest and what the body does when we enter that rest and digest state. So this is how you should feel after you've done a practice. So if you're triggered, one of the things I say a lot is I recommend not using this process or this information just to handle triggers. There's going to be some foundational stuff I recommend in changing the way your brain function works. But when you're in a triggered state, after doing the practice, you should feel what I'm going to talk about. If you don't, do a different practice. Don't give up. We were talking about this last night after the meetup. Well, I tried it and it didn't work. Then you try something else. You keep trying. It's worth it. Everything I say, because sometimes fight or flight mechanisms can feel good. Righteous indignation is one of the worst. It's like when you have a right to be angry, right? Or have a right to feel a certain way, we'll stay in that. But we have to ask ourselves the question, is it worth dying for? Because anytime I stay in a state of suffering, I'm in a dying process. My body is aging and dying.
I just wanted to mention, based on what you said, there's those people who say, I love adversity, right? Mm-hmm. Because it makes me feel stronger. Or those people who are like, I love stress because they get that adrenaline rush and they start studying harder. You would probably recommend like not to go that route, right?
Well, they don't. So if it's a stress feeling, sometimes people don't use the words the words that they're using won't correlate. So for example, if they're feeling like it's going to make them work harder, that's motivation, which is a different brain function. Okay. They're calling it stress, okay, but it's not as much an adrenaline rush. An adrenaline rush comes from threat of imminent death. So it is always a trigger. Now, some people do start to like the feeling of it because they do feel stronger. Because if we're the weak gazelle, if we're the one being chased by the tiger, we want someone else to be weaker than us. We want to gain position some way. So sometimes people will use it to motivate, like adrenaline rushes and stuff. And I'm going to talk about why that happens as we talk about the prefrontal cortex, So it's kind of like a lot of times, though, what we're experiencing when we're remaining in a fight or flight is a state of suffering. Now, if the person has to have the adrenaline rush to feel alive, then that means that whenever they don't have it, they feel dead, which is a state of suffering. So it's kind of like picking through all those little realizations of it. And it's finally coming to understand, like we've talked about before, that some people don't even know they're suffering. They have low-level stress all the time. They have no idea they're suffering. They think it's fine. Yeah, well, and it's a natural state if they've had it their whole life, especially if it's an adopted condition, right? So it's going to vary depending on the individual. So we really have to start to get to know. And this is the thing I talk about. You want to start using your life as a gauge. So the mood I'm in isn't about the conditions. It's about whether or not I'm triggered. And I can start using that to gauge and say, well, if I'm feeling any state of suffering, that means I'm triggered. I want to get out of that. rather than blaming the condition and saying, well, of course I feel that way because this happened, or, you know, because then we're just keeping ourselves, and it ends up we give our power away to that condition. Yes, yes, yes. So what the body does as we come out of it is, on a physical level, we still have an enlarged amygdala. So when we've entered a rest and digest state, we haven't altered the amygdala. The amygdala is still ready because it's like, okay, well, yeah, you're in rest and digest now, but I have to be prepared for the next trigger. So the amygdala is still enlarged. So we're still subject to a fight or flight response when we're entering a rest and digest state. Now the systems are back on, but they're not at their peak. So we're going to feel better. And so this is why I always say I call serotonin the I'm not dying chemical, because it not dying feels better than dying. And for some people, that's the best we feel. That's the best I felt. I was in fight or flight 90% of the time. Rest and digest 10%, and I had no idea what thriving was. I had no idea. I couldn't even conceive of the concept. So I just, those rest and digest moments for me were gold. That was life being good, the best it could get, right? So it does feel better, but we're not in peak performance at this level. We are still dependent on the practice, right? So if I'm counting on the whatever I'm going to get myself out of my fight or flight state, I am now dependent on that thing to get me out. What's happening again on that physical level, our amygdala is still enlarged. We're still subject to fight or flight response. Systems are on it, but not peak, and we're dependent on whatever has relieved the suffering, right? On a mental level, we're just in primal homeostasis, which means we're still subject to external triggers, right? So right now we're in just primal rest and digest. So we're in the same models that monkeys are using. That I'm not running from a tiger right now. I've found a way to hide from the tiger for today. Doesn't mean that tiger won't show up tomorrow, or in an hour from now, or in 5 minutes from now, right? I'm still subject to that. I relieve the suffering. I feel secure and placated. I might be in a thinking, analytical monkey mind, but this is, when we're in a fight or flight state, we can't think very well, so it is an improvement. So we should be able to be in a state where we can think. On an emotional level, I feel safe, but my safety is in familiarity. So I'm still subject to change being a trigger. I am dependent on my tribe. If I lose a tribe member or a relationship, could be a trigger. And I am subject to externalized value. So it feels better, but it's really not good enough. Not for humans. People can get addicted to problem solving. You know, for me, like early on in my process, I got addicted to therapy because I could think through, find something wrong, and when I fixed it, I got an adrenaline rush from that. I got actually dopamine rush where I felt strong and felt, you know, so it was the good adrenaline. It was the, oh, I can do this. I feel good, right? Because I fixed something, right? But that meant I constantly wanted to be ripping myself apart all the time. So my therapist fired me from therapy. She told me I was as good as I was going to get. She didn't know me very well that way, but she knew me really well. She knew who I was then. She didn't know what I was capable of. So, yeah, so it really is, monkey mind is just a thinking mind, because humans are really to the point now where we can be beyond. So I hope from that you're beginning to see the pattern of how our mind works. As we continue forward, I want to really address this idea of the subconscious survival mechanisms that drive addiction and how to move those into conscious evolution without it being an arduous effort. So the autopilot of the subconscious mind is based on our history. We've talked about that. That memory we've talked about is just history. So what it's doing is the subconscious mind is making suggestions to the conscious mind. But it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy from our body to use the conscious mind. So we have a limited amount of energy our body produces. And so the brain is very conservative in how it works. It works off the autopilot as much as possible in order to conserve that energy. But when it comes to conserving energy and these suggestions of the subconscious mind, we often accept those suggestions as facts. And then we're stuck in these old patterns patterns of behavior, either from our ancestors or from ourselves. And we feel like they're who we are, but all they are is suggestions. The subconscious mind is willing to change. It's willing to be different. We just need to train the brain to question itself. And so that's what the practice will be today. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue with that feeling observation log, and we're going to use a scale of 1 to 10 practice. And as I mentioned, we're not going to be using a scale of 1 to 10 for severity of how we feel. What we're going to use is a scale of 1 to 10 to measure, am I in a subconscious autopilot or am I consciously choosing? And so we're going to be doing this through 3 different sets. And what we'll do is, with each day this week, there will be a practice. We'll have the practice of measuring on that scale. And then the next day will be followed by a practice of seeing if we can evolve that, if we can expand it. And then we'll go back and do another scale practice and then back to expanding it. So we'll do that 3 times. So over the next 6 days, you'll have this practice. And the 3 scales we're going to evaluate are, first, that subconscious versus conscious. Am I on an autopilot of historic thinking, or is this a new thought? Is this something that I've learned recently? And for those of us in recovery, this becomes really clearly definitive in the fact of usually what we're learning in new recovery centers. We're learning a new way of thinking, and it's very contrary to our old way of thinking. So it's pretty easy to kind of tell where on that scale that would fall. And so that one's pretty straightforward. The other 2 we're going to do have to do with our senses and our feelings, which maybe aren't quite as straightforward. So I want to explain those a little bit. So we have the senses, the 5 senses we know: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. So what we're going to do is we are going to address these senses versus a 6th sense. Now, I'm not talking about 6th sense from a paranormal or spiritual perspective. To me, the 6th sense is our internal sense, our internal body. And so this is measured by the insula and the striatum, where our body is always measuring its homeostasis. So if it feels like something isn't safe, if something internally isn't happening well, then we have these results of these emotions or other things that we respond with. But that internal feeling of, am I at peace, right? So for example, I have sensory information. It may be getting cooler outside as weather changes from summer to fall, or it might be certain times of day, there's more light and less light. There are internal senses to that we aren't consciously aware of. Like as the light changes, maybe I get more tired and I don't realize it. For some people, as it gets darker, they get more energy. Other people, as it gets darker, they feel more sleepy, right? Each of us is unique that way. But the internal feeling, we often don't connect with. We connect with the external sense. So, for example, I might connect with the idea of it being cool outside, but I may not recognize that, but inside, I don't feel comfortable being in cold weather. So this is a trigger point that I realize that anytime it's below 32 degrees outside, I get cranky, like instantly. I am agitated. So for a long time, I didn't know that. I just would be agitated, and I'd know it's cold outside, and I'd say, oh, it's cold outside, it's cold outside. So I was connecting to the sensory information that it's cold outside, but I wasn't connecting to the 6th sense that I feel threatened by the cold because I can die because it's cold. So this was an old mechanism in my body that said, you're not safe because you can freeze to death. Now, this doesn't serve me when I'm just walking from my house to the car, or when I'm just outside for an evening walk and I'm going to be back home and I'm not actually at risk of dying, right? Because I'm not out living off the land at risk now. I'm not at real risk of hypothermia or anything, but my brain is responding like I am. Because the second I step into cold weather, it reacts. And so this is where I become aware. And I only became aware that I triggered in cold weather because I was observational. Because I've been observing my triggers for long enough that I'm like, wow, I get cranky when it's cold. Why? And I started to contemplate that. So that's what we're doing with this practice. So we'll go beyond what we usually do with recognizing the 5 senses that we notice consciously, and we'll address the subconscious 6th sense. Another one that we'll address is emotional responses versus deeper feeling levels. And so this is where I talk about, we can have thoughts that are historic thoughts and current thoughts, which are often, like I said, what we address in our work as we work on recovery in most recovery programs. The other thing is that internal feeling and emotion, most people don't know the difference between these. And I remember when I was studying for my practitioner license, this was a field of study which was trying to understand the difference between these. And I didn't ever really understand it. It wasn't fully explained to me until I started to create my own program, and I started to say, how would I describe it? And so this is the best way to look at it. Emotions are what we emote. They are the external response, and they're the thing we're familiar with. Sadness, anger, even depression, panic, things like PTSD. So there are these emotional responses that are about how we interact in the world at an emotional level. Feelings are what's happening internally again. You're probably seeing a pattern that all of this is about what's happening inside of my body. So for example, when I get angry, maybe my chest tightens and all my muscles tense up. And maybe next day I have a headache, or maybe I feel it in my gut. Sometimes I would get a bit nauseous. I was a person that, ironically, whenever I'd get really angry, I'd cry. And it's the strangest thing. Or if I got really uncomfortable and nervous about something, I would laugh. I would laugh at the most inappropriate times, and I never meant to, but this was that internal response. And I started to understand, the laughter is fear. The tears are anger. And so what's the real internal feeling here? What is behind that? What's happening inside of my body when I have these emotions? Am I focused on the expression, the emoting, or the emotion? Or am I focused on the feeling? I'm focused on anger, so that would be on the low end of the scale, instead of, I'm kind of focused on, I feel this tightness in my gut, and I know it's anger, but I'm aware that my anger is in my gut. We want to be able to start observing ourselves at that level. What's happening inside of my body? You take focus off the world. I can't control the world, but me, if I want to have self-control, I need to be able to know what's happening inside of me. I need to know what I'm controlling. And so it's time to start kind of connecting with that and getting to know our internal selves so that we can move into stage 2 after we reach the 12th class here. So we're going to go up to class 12, and then we're going to move into a new kind of work. And so to do that, we need to start being able to reflect on ourselves. So that's what this practice is really about. That will be what the practices are about for the next couple weeks. So that'll be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the session. I look forward to connecting with you again for the meditation. I hope everyone has a beautiful day.